As I've studied the Bible, my conclusion is that there's really three different kinds of biblical giving that the Bible speaks about. And we introduced the subject last week by talking about the dreaded word tithing. And people, they shy away from that, and people say, well, that was under the law, that's got nothing to do with us. Now, under the law, they were required to give, and the Levites were required to take tithes, whether your heart was in it or not. But that's not where tithing started. It started with Abraham, even before that probably, but as far as the revelation of Scripture is concerned, Abraham tithed. And last week we looked at his grandson Jacob. And when Jacob left home and he established his own relationship with God, and he said this, he says, Lord, if you will be with me, and you will protect me, and you will give me food to eat and raiment to put on, and you will give me peace, then you will be my God. And here's what he says, of all that thou givest me, I will surely give the tenth unto thee. Now that's way before the law. But what that represented was an ageless, timeless, universal principle of worship. Worship is acknowledging who God is. Everything that I have comes through the fingers of God. It comes from the hand of God. And tithing or giving 10% is basically a tangible way of acknowledging the worthyship of God. That's what worship is. It's giving God his proper place. Now, if God doesn't give you anything, you don't have to give him anything back. But if God has and does supply your need, then we thank him and we worship him by tithing. So really, tithing is a response to God. My personal, intimate relationship with God, knowing that what I have comes from his hand. By the way, there's nobody in this church that will come looking for your tithe. I don't know who tithes. I don't know what anybody gives other than myself. But that's between you and the Lord. You see, it's a thing about worship. And we said this last time. The reason we pass the plate in our services and we give in the offering is because it's part of our worship. Just as much as singing is and praying and listening to the preaching, our giving is worshiping God. So tithing is a response to the provision of God for me. Now, nobody makes me do that, but that's between me and him. And there may be people in here that don't. I'm sure there are people that don't tithe in here. That's between you and the Lord. But what I'm saying is the Bible teaches when we worship God with our tithes. Now, the second kind of giving that we're going to look at today is the giving called almsgiving. So I want us to turn to Matthew chapter 6. And we're going to read the first 4 verses of Matthew chapter 6. So let's look at that. Matthew chapter 6. And if you're able, would you please stand with me for the reading of God's word this morning. In the Gospel of Matthew chapter 6, verse 1 to 4, Jesus said this. He said, take heed that you do not your alms before men, to be seen of them. Otherwise you have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Therefore, when thou doest thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be seen, that they may have the glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But when thou doest thine alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. Now later on in this chapter, in verse 5, he says, and when thou prayest. And when we talk about this, it's not if you pray, it's when you pray. And when you pray, this is the way you're supposed to do it. We have the model prayer here. Well, it's the same thing with giving. He doesn't say if you give your alms. He says that when you do it. Verse 3, when thou doest thine alms. You say, well, what is alms? Well, we're going to find out here today. If tithing is a response to God's provision for me, so I see what God is doing for me, I acknowledge that, and I'm thanking Lord, thank you. And I worship the Lord by giving back to the Lord 1/10. Then almsgiving is a response to seeing a need that someone else has. And let me say this, not all giving is to be done in church. Much of our giving is to be done outside of church. And some of our giving is not necessarily about dollars and cents. It could be helping somebody. It could be a material thing that you have that they don't have that they need, and you see that need and then you go to meet that. Almsgiving is a response to someone else's need. Now we're going to get into the detail of that in just a moment. But almsgiving is something that actually God is interested in, and actually He rewards. In this passage here, in these first 4 verses, he says in verse 1, otherwise ye have no reward. If you do to be seen of men, you won't be rewarded. In verse number 2, the last part, I say unto they have their reward. Verse 4, he says that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret, himself shall reward thee openly. Did you know that there's certain kinds of giving that if you do it in the right way, with the right spirit, the right attitude, that God sees that and He's going to reward you. In fact, Jesus Himself said, give, and it shall be given unto you. Pressed down, shaken together, shall men give into your bosom. Now, some people think, well, when God gives it to me, then I'll give it out. But He says, no, you give first, and then actually God will reward you. Not just in heaven, but here. In fact, if you look across the page there at verse number 19 through 21, Jesus said, lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, where thieves do not break through and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Jesus says that the treasure we have down here is temporary. It can be stolen, it can decay, it can corrupt. But there is a treasure that we can lay up in heaven. Now let me ask you something. How do you take your treasure and put it up there? The way to accumulate treasure in heaven is by what you give down here. And the Lord is watching, and He speaks of reward. There is treasures in heaven. As many of course, understand, you can't take it with you, right? And of course, the famous missionary Jim Elliot said, he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. Now, of course, it takes faith to do that, because if you don't believe there is a heaven, then you don't want to get all that you can get right here, right now, because you don't believe there is a later. But if you do believe there is a heaven and that you're going there, then you will prepare for that place. And Jesus said, lay up your treasures in heaven. Now, how do we understand this thing called almsgiving? Well, there's 3 important principles that are biblical that we want to show you this morning in the message. First of all, we're going to look at the what, and then the why, and then the how. So what is almsgiving? Almsgiving, first of all, is giving what you have. Okay? So let's look at Luke chapter number 11, just to begin, just a little verse here to show you at the beginning. We're going to, in this first point, we'll look at several scriptures. But in Luke chapter number 11, and verse number 41, it says, Jesus said, but rather give alms of such things as ye have, and behold, all things are clean unto you. Now, this is a principle that we're going to see over and over again. Almsgiving has to do with giving what you can afford to give, and it does, maybe not money, it could be a thing. It could be you have 2 coats and this guy's freezing over here, and you take the coat that you do have, the extra one, and you can afford to give it to him, and that's so you see the need and you have it, and so you share that with someone else. Look over, please, at Ezra chapter number 2. Ezra chapter number 2. Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms. Way back yonder. Ezra chapter 2. Now, this is when the people of Judah are coming back from the Babylonian captivity, and they're going to, first of all, they're going to reestablish a sacrificial system on the Temple Mount. The temple was burned and destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, and they're going to rebuild the temple. Now, this temple they're going to rebuild, which is the second temple, is just a shadow of Solomon's temple. But they knew that they wanted a temple. Now, it takes money to build stuff, right? And so in verse 68, it says, and some of the chief fathers, when they came to the house of the Lord, which is at Jerusalem, offered freely. All right, now here's another principle. Almsgiving is a free will offering. God doesn't make you do it. He doesn't constrain you. Nobody else makes you do it. This is something between, it's in your heart. It's born in your heart. It does have a relationship with God. Many times God will touch your heart, speak to your heart about a need. But it's also, as we'll see in a little bit, it's also where you see the need. And God touches your heart. But it's something you decide. Nobody tells you to give this. It's something you decide. It belongs to you. It's a free will offering. But notice in verse 69 it says, and they gave after their ability, those 3 words, after their ability, unto the treasure of the work, 70 1,000 drams of gold, £5,000 of silver, 100 priest garments. In other words, this was stuff that these families had. And they were able to return from Persia with these things. Obviously, the Persians took over from the Babylonians. And, Jewish people always know how to make money. So they had some things. They had priest garments. And they came back to Israel, came back to Jerusalem. And they wanted to see the work of God go forward. And they wanted to see this temple built. And so they were touched about this. They were emotionally involved with this. And they took what they had and they offered it, a free will offering, after their ability. Now, some people have more ability than others. But the principle is almsgiving is giving what you have. Look at Acts chapter number 11, please. Acts chapter number 11. And we'll actually see some of this tonight. We're in Acts chapter 4 tonight. But in Acts chapter 11, verse 27, and in these days came prophets from Jerusalem unto Antioch, and there stood up one of them named Agabus, and signified by the Spirit that there should be a great dearth. In other words, there's going to be a famine throughout all the world, which came to pass in the days of Claudius Caesar. Verse 29, then the disciples, every man, watch this now, according to his ability, determined to send relief unto the brethren which dwelt in Judea. In other words, they realized there's poor saints in Jerusalem. This famine's going to make it worse for them. So let's have a whip round. We're going to take an offering up, and we're going to send it to the elders in Jerusalem, and we're going to try to take care of their needs. Now, this is kind of interesting because tonight, this happened in Acts chapter 2. It happened in Acts chapter 4, and Acts chapter 5. The day of Pentecost was a pilgrimage feast, and they had Jews coming from everywhere to Jerusalem. Peter gets up, preaches on the day of Pentecost, and 3,000 people get saved, and they hung around. Now, these people were strangers, they're foreigners, they're on vacation. And you know what it's like with your money on vacation. I mean, money takes wings. And so these guys, they wanted to hang around because of what God was doing on the day of Pentecost. And what we find is that the other people the Jerusalem people, they supplied the need. As every man had need, they would sell possessions or whatever, and they would share what they had to feed these people on vacation from all these different places so that they could remain. So the Jerusalem saints took care of the foreign saints there in Jerusalem in early Acts. Later on in Acts, right here, it's going to be reversed. And the same people that the believers in Jerusalem took care of, now they're going to be in need. And so it flips. And the foreigners are now going to send money to the saints in Jerusalem. But this was almsgiving, and it was giving according to their ability. They determined to send relief. Now look at Acts chapter 3, if you would. This is, of course, the story of Peter's second sermon, and it is predicated by this wonderful thing that happened to the man that was born lame. In fact, this story continues through chapter 3 and chapter 4, and this is a great opportunity that the Lord gives because the Lord heals this man that was born lame. He's laid at the gate beautiful, just outside the temple. Probably been there he's over 40 years old, so he'd probably been there a long time. And so at the hour of prayer, Peter and John are going to the temple, going through the gate beautiful. And if you look down at verse number 2 of Acts chapter 3, and a certain man, lame from his mother's womb, was carried, whom they laid daily at the gate of the temple, which is called Beautiful, to ask alms. There's our word, alms, of them that entered into the temple, who seeing Peter and John about to go into the temple, asked an alms. What is he? He's asking for money from everybody going in. Verse 4, Peter, fastening his eyes upon him with John, said, look on us. Peter gets his attention. Verse 5, and he gave heed unto them, expecting to receive something of them. Then Peter said, and here's what Peter says, silver and gold. Now, what is the principle of almsgiving? It's giving what you have. Could Peter spare a quarter? He didn't have any money. That's interesting, isn't it? Peter said, silver and gold have I none, but such as I have give I thee. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk. And he took him by the right hand, lifted him up, and immediately his feet and ankle bones received strength. And he, leaping up, stood and walked and entered in, walking and leaping. And this guy, boy, I love this guy. He's so excited. He just doesn't stand up and walk. He's jumping all over the place. He's running and leaping and praising God. He's so excited. He never walked before. How did he learn to walk? Well, God who healed his ankle bones gave them the ability to walk and run and leap. Oh, what a wonderful... And there was many, in fact, 5,000 people got saved because of this. They all came running. And Peter saw an opportunity, and he stands there and he preaches the gospel. But you see, the principle is you give what you have. Peter didn't have silver and gold, but what did he have? He had Jesus. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk. You see, almsgiving is giving what you have. You see, some people have more ability than others. Some people have more than others. So some people can give more than others. Some people are wealthy, and they have the ability. There was a man by the name of Art de Moss, dead now, but he was a multimillionaire. Instead of giving the 10% of the Lord, which would have been a lot, he had so much money, he could live on the 10% very comfortably, and he gave 90% to the Lord. When Leslie and I were at Tennessee Temple, there was a whole big, beautiful, modern dormitory that was built. It was called the Art de Moss Dormitory because he gave like $4 or $5 million to the Tennessee Temple to build it. And there's some people can do that. There's a man by John C. Lasker, who's also dead, who left us $300,000, $315,000 to go into that building right there. Amen. And he, being dead, is still reaping rewards because he had it. So it's a tool that can be used for the Lord. So the first principle in almsgiving is it's giving according to your ability. It's giving what you have. If you don't have it, then you don't have to give it. But if you do have it, there's the opportunity to do it. That's the what. The why of almsgiving. Almsgiving should be in response to need. It's giving what you have, but it's giving what you have in response to need. Now, I want you to look at Luke chapter 10, and we'll get to this in just a second, but just turn to Luke chapter 10. What we found in Ezra, when the people were coming from Persia back to Jerusalem, they came into Jerusalem and they saw the need of the temple. It lay in ruins, and their heart was discouraged, depressed, grieved, saddened that this beautiful temple, the wonder of the world, Solomon's temple, was no longer in existence. And they were just grieved. But they said, we got to do something. We've got to rebuild this. And it's going to take money to rebuild it. It's going to take gold and silver to rebuild it. It's going to take the priests to have garments to do all of this, to reestablish the sacrificial system. But the thing is, they saw the need. And what happened was they were touched. Emotionally, they were touched with this need. In Acts chapter 11, they heard the prophet say there's going to be a dearth. And they knew there was going to be need. They remembered their friends in Jerusalem, how generous they were. And they said, well, we got to do something about this. They heard about this need, and they thought, we've got to do something. They were touched. In Acts chapter 3, Peter and John saw the need of this man lying at the gate, lame from his mother's womb. And Peter said, we got to do something about this. And he knew that the Lord was able to do this. Many times in our church, we hear of needs. So it's not just the individual that can be involved in almsgiving. The church can be involved in almsgiving as well. And I've tried to think some of the illustrations of this. There's too many to number. We know of missionaries that have needs. We have evangelists have needs. And we would take an offering, $2,000, $3,000, and just send it to them just because we wanted to, because we saw that they had a need. You see, the word alms, this is important. The word alms means, it's an Aramaic word that can be translated mercy. It can be translated pity. It can be translated compassion. An alms gift is a mercy gift. It's a gift of compassion. I see the need. It moves me. The bowels of compassion. James said, how can it be that you see a brother or sister destitute of food and raiment, and you're not moved, your bowels are not moved with the compassion? Go, God bless you, be you warmed and filled, and you don't do anything. What's wrong with you? Do you not have any emotion? Can you not see that? Are you not touched with the needs that you see around you? This is only about maybe 6 or 8 months ago, and I was at a preacher's fellowship. Can't remember where it was, and this fellow came up to me. I didn't know him. He was a pastor. He said, "Your brother Fittis?" I said, "Yes." He says, "We're a church in Creekville, and do you remember many years ago?" And when he's talking many years ago, it's probably 15 or 16 years ago. He put out an email. He was a pastor of a very small church, and they had a little building, and they had an opportunity to, I think, to expand or to purchase a different building or whatever it was. He was looking for money. He just put an email out, and I saw it and I read it, and I thought, that's terrible. That young fellow up there, he needs some support. He needs some help. And now this is at the other church, Temple Baptist, and I went to the church and I said, here's a man who needs some money. This is on a Wednesday night we did this. Some of you were there and some of you may remember. And I said, I think we should just encourage this young preacher and give him $1,000. So we voted and we sent the guy $1,000. And he comes to me like 15 years later. He says, you don't me, but I'm the pastor that you sent $1,000. He said, I forgot all about it. Isn't that wonderful? And he was so grateful. But the thing I remember about that story was not him. That happened on a Wednesday night. On a Thursday night, during the day, we had a tornado come through Warren County. And some of you will remember, it came within 200 yards of our church building. And it missed us. But it knocked about 4 or 5 shingles off. You say, well, we got the insurance adjuster out. You know what he did? He put a brand spanking new roof on the whole church for $0 to us. And I said to our church later on, now you may not put 2 and 2 together, but I can imagine a situation where God touched my heart about sending this guy $1,000, and I hardened my heart and said, nah, somebody else can take care of that. And that tornado come through the next day and go right through the middle of our auditorium. I could see that happening. But God saw what happened there, and he said, just nudge that over that way a little bit. That's going to take 4 or 5, but they need a new roof anyway, so we're going to take 4 or 5 shingles off. It's not going to damage the church. They're going to get a brand new roof out of it. I don't know. You say, well, whatever. You think what you want. But I think those things are real. And we have had requests for helping church building when we were starting this building. You remember the brother Isaac in India? And we sent him enough money to build 2 church buildings in India. And, of course, in Bulgaria, the oil and flour offering, the coats and for kids. You see these little kids, and they're running around barefoot, and it's below freezing, and, they're all dirty and disheveled and have nothing. And God touches our heart and says, you got to do something about that. He said, yeah, we are. We're going to take up a Happy Birthday Jesus offering at Christmas time and send them money, a few $1,000s to buy lots and lots of coats. God loves that stuff. He sees all that stuff. And he rewards that stuff. We see the orphans down in Panama, and Miss Lorena gets to go down, and God is interested. Almsgiving is something for the church to be involved in, but something for me to be involved in. Maybe not even the church that's here. I think most of our missions giving, now we're going to talk about grace giving later on, which is actually giving something you don't have, which is even more exciting. But most of our giving the missionaries is almsgiving. We see the need. God touches our heart. That's why when the missionaries come, we show the slides, we show the need, we have them talk about what the need is. Because I want God to speak to our hearts and say, man, we need to get involved. We need to help with that. We need to take this guy on for support. We need to send him $100 a month so that with other churches so they can get out there and do the will of God in their lives and help these people and preach the gospel. That's all. It's compassion. It's mercy. God is touching our hearts. So it's giving what you can afford to give. It's giving what you already have. And it's giving according to need. Now, I told you to turn to Luke chapter 30, and I want you to see this. This is a very famous story, the story of the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan. But the point I want you to see here, it's in response to need. In Ezra 2, they saw the need. In Acts 11, they heard the need. In Acts 3, Peter and John saw this guy. It's important that you make the connection between your supply and the need of the other person. And this could be you're driving down the road someday and you see a lady and she's pulled over and her car's broke down. Maybe her car's in the middle of the road. And you're strong enough and you have the time or whatever and you pull the car over and this happened to me about a year ago. It was pouring down with rain. Poor lady, she's on 55, the old road. And I had a tow rope and I got out and got on the ground, put the tow rope around her front axle and got her, because she was it was right on the other side of a big hill. Around a corner and over a hill, and she was sitting right there, and I thought, man, somebody's going to run into her. And I had the time, and I had the tow rope, and so I turned it around, I parked in front of her, put the tow rope on, and pulled her into the Dollar General there. She was so appreciative. Didn't give her I gave her some leaflets. I didn't give her any money. But it was something I could do for her. It was a need, and God said, you got to do something. And so you do something. God will give you those opportunities. And here the Good Samaritan, verse 31, by chance there came down a certain priest that way, and when he saw him, this man that was robbed and wounded and left for dead, and the priest, the religious guy, he saw him. And instead of having compassion, he passed by on the other side. He ignored it. He hardened his heart. Likewise, a Levite, when he saw the place, came and looked on him and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him and went to him and bound up his wounds. He could do that. He had the ability to do that. He poured in oil. Why did he pour the oil in the wine? Because that's what he had. And he set him on his own beast. He had that. And he brought him to an inn and took care of him. And on the morrow when he parted, he took 2 pence out and gave it to the host and said unto him, take care of him. Whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, Why did he give him 2 pennies? Because that's what he had. And Jesus said, the Samaritans were despised. But Jesus used the Samaritan as the best example, the good example, when the religious crowd ignored the need and hardened their heart. Here was a man that wasn't supposed to be able to do this, and yet he was the good neighbor. Love thy neighbors as you love yourself. And so that's the why. The why. Why do we do this? Why do we reach out? Why do I give something that I have to somebody else? Because they have need, and it's a genuine need, and it moves my heart, and God touches my heart. So, now sometimes I see people who say they have needs, and there's something not right about it. You have to be worried with people walking around with their hands out. Because many times it's not a genuine thing. They're spongers. And that doesn't move me. But when I see somebody who's real, and sometimes you have to investigate them. They're not going to come to you. You got to go to them. You got to see what's going on. And then God touches your heart about it, and then do everything you can to meet that person's need. That's what almsgiving is. And then lastly, the how. What is it? It's giving what you have. Why is it? Because of mercy and pity and compassion. And as we go back to Matthew chapter 6, Jesus tells us how to go about it. Matthew chapter 6, verse 1, he says, take heed that you do not your alms before men, to be seen of them. Otherwise you have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Now in chapter 6 here, he's getting after the hypocrites. When they prayed, they would stand they make long prayers and to be seen of men. Oh, how righteous, oh, how holy, what a holy man. And they bathed in the adoration of other people. God's not into that. He says, when you pray, enter into your closet privately before God. And when God, who sees you praying in secret, will reward you openly. Same principle. He says, when you're giving, don't make a big deal out of it. Everybody watch now. Look at this check that I'm putting in the plate. Everybody see how large this offering I'm putting in the plate. That's why we have offering envelopes. I don't use an offering envelope because I just put it on the check. But what I do is I take the check and I fold it over so you can't see what it is. And if you do write your offering on an envelope and you put it in the plate, how should you put the envelope in the plate? Upside down. Put it all the zeros and just look at that. Do you see that? Because it's between you and God. It's nothing to do with me. It's nothing to do with your brother or sister sitting next to you. I mean, he goes on, he says this, he says in verse 3, but when thou doest thine alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. In other words, this should be done in secret. Almsgiving is giving what you have because of compassion, and you should do it secret. It's between you and the Lord. But I have done this, and there's a thrill to it. It's a secret. Nobody knows about it but me and the Lord. But I remember there was a missionary. There were several things that happened at one meeting. But Brother Bowman could tell you some of these stories. But there was a guy come up to me in a church, and he handed a big roll of notes to me. And it was one of these handshakes. He puts the roll of notes in your hand, and I just said, "Thank you very much." And I put it in my pocket, and I didn't take it out, and I didn't look at it. It could have been a roll of ones, or it could have been a roll of 50s. I still don't know to this day. And the guy that I was staying with, he was an old student from Tennessee Temple days, and there he was in just a little old house, and I think he had like 7 kids running around and his wife, and they had nothing. And I don't think I was staying with him, but I think they fed me a meal. And I came into his house, and I'm sitting on the sofa, and I was looking at all the needs that he had. God help him. And God touched my heart, and he says, you should do something. Do you know what I did? I put my hand in the pocket and grabbed that roll of notes, and I took it out. I still don't know what was in it. And I stuffed it down the sofa. And I left the house, and I still don't know it was in the roll. Maybe it was a roll of ones, God help him if it was. But I hope it was a roll of hundreds. But you know what? I felt so good about that. And in the same, I might as well tell all the stories, but in the same meeting, there was another missionary there. And he gave me an offering. No. I gave him an offering. That's what he had an offering basket on his missionary display. Sometimes missionaries do this; they need money, and so nobody was looking. And I forget what I gave him. It wasn't very much, but maybe $20 or something, $40, something like that. And nobody saw me, and I felt really good about it. Do you know what happened? That guy came to me later on that meeting. He says, "My wife and I are going to support you as missionaries." They supported us $60 a month for like 18 years or something like that. I got more than $20 back. I was in another meeting, and these are all stories from long ago. I've told these stories before. But Jim Vineyard's school out there in Oklahoma City, can't remember the name of the school, but anyway, I was preaching in chapel time. Before I preached, I was going down the corridor and had all the missionary letters, and I saw a missionary letter from Bob Zemeski, who's a missionary in Ireland. And he was telling a story about David Moore, who's my best friend, right? And David had just moved from Belfast to Dublin, and he says, David's just moved down here. He's no washer, no dryer. He needs, can you send some money for a washer and dryer? And God touched me. He says, you need to do something. I said, Lord, I'm skint. I mean, I was a missionary myself, just starting out, no money. I said, Lord, if I had the money, I would give an offering for that. Well, I preached in the chapel, and afterwards, the principal of the school brought me in his office. He says, I've been doing this for 15 years. And we just took an offering from Bible school students, and they're worse than I am. They have no money at all. He says, this is the largest offering we've ever taken in this chapel. I said, oh, really? I can't remember what. It was several $100s. And he put it in my hand. I thought, man, that's fantastic. And I'm walking out of the office, and I walk by the prayer letter, and the Lord taps me on the shoulder, and he says, Tom, do you remember what he said to me a few minutes ago? And so anyway, he got his washing machine. And anyway... So and this is the other thing about this. I love telling these stories. They're just fantastic because it's not about me, it's about what the Lord did, right? So that's that church, Oklahoma Brother Vineyard's church. They didn't take me on. I went there and preached. They gave me the love offering and didn't get any support. We went to Ireland for 4 years. Came back 4 years later, and Joe and Nancy, we wanted to go to see the Grand Canyon. Never been out there, so we left Blytheville, Arkansas. Got in a car, went along 40. And it was Sunday when we got to Oklahoma City, so we stopped and went in the church. And Brother Vineyard knew who we were, and we went in and enjoyed the service. So they're doing a baptism right at the end of the service, so we're staying for that. It was going to take a few minutes. And so he stands up while they're getting ready for the baptism. He says, Brother Fittis is here. Brother Fittis, come on up here. And he said, he knew all about me. I didn't know he knew me. He said, Brother Fittis is a missionary in Northern Ireland. And so Brother Fittis, come up here and pray. And he said, we just had a missionary come off the field just a few weeks ago, and we have some extra mission money. He says, I propose we take Brother Fittis on for support right here now. And everybody said amen. I couldn't believe it. And they supported me for another 15 years. God sees that stuff. Yes. Now that gets into more about grace giving, what we'll talk about next time. But he says, now I just spoiled my whole point. Do it in secret for it. But what I'm saying is that don't be doing this. We had a guy in our church, and he sold a house, and I didn't know much about his giving, but he came to me and he says, I've got this large offering, and I want to give it to... In fact, he wasn't giving it to the church. It went to Lighthouse Baptist Ministries, but he wanted to make a whole big deal out of it. And yet I knew there were people in our church, and I didn't get into all their finance, but I knew that they were giving sacrificially. And I knew this guy didn't really give. But he wanted to make a whole big deal out of this offering. Let me tell you something, that's not the way to do it. God says do it in secret. Amen. And when you do it in secret, it'll reward you openly. You see, there's a blessing. And when you do it in secret like that, there's something about it. I don't know what it is. But it's just a joy. Jesus said it's more blessed to give than it is to receive. But he says, he that giveth, let him do it with simplicity. And so, give it in secret. Now, you got to talk to your wife about it. Or your husband about it. Maybe. If it involves both finances of your house, obviously you need to be in agreement about that. But don't make it known. Do it in private. And there's a special joy in that. There's a special blessing in that. There's 3 different kinds of giving. The first one is worship giving in response to what God has done for me. And I love Him. And I'm grateful that I can give. And it's a blessing to give. The second kind of giving is alms giving, which is in response to need. I have the ability. I see the need. I'm moved. I'm going to do something about it. And when I do that, and I do it in the right way, and I do it secretly, I don't make a big deal out of it. And sometimes we have done this where maybe there's a need we see in the church, and we'll just give an offering, maybe give it to that person anonymously. And we'll say, the person who gives you this doesn't want you to know. And they don't know who it is. And it's a blessing. And don't tell anybody. That's the way we're supposed to do it. So what about you? Do you give? And I want to say this, when we talk about the next level of giving is giving what you can't afford. Does the Bible talk about that? It really does, and it's really even more exciting. But you can't give what you can't afford until first of all you give what you can afford. And you can't give what you have until first of all you give really what belongs to the Lord. The Bible says the tithe is the Lord's. If I take my tithe and give it to almsgiving, I'm taking God's money, not my money. So I give God what belongs to Him in worship. And then I allow myself to be open to see need and look for needs, look for opportunities. Because what? I'm trying to lay up investments in heaven. So I look for opportunities. If it's genuine, it's real, God touches my heart, then out of compassion we give the almsgiving. And then later on we'll talk about what about giving what you can't afford. And that's really interesting. That'll be for next time. But do you give? Jesus said it's more blessed to give than it is to receive. Now, we don't preach about this, all right? You'll have to come back. We're going to talk about it next time, and then you'll have to wait another year until you hear a message about this, unless I'm preaching through the scriptures and talking about it, because we don't harp on this. Our church, this is the most generous, giving church I've ever been a member of. It's true. And yet we never talk about it. Because you know what? If your heart is right with the Lord, there's no problem with this. And so I'm so grateful to be a part of a church like this. But God's eyes are upon us. You know, I don't know where our membership is, maybe 85 or something like that. And we've just built $1 million, it's actually $1 million plus building. We've done it for $1 million. But where does 85 people come up with $1 million? It's impossible. But with God, all things are possible. And I'm telling you right now, and I preached about it a year ago, Thanksgiving, that we were thanking God for it before it actually came. But God has done this. But one of the reasons He's done it is because God knows that you give to others. He says, give, and it shall be given unto you. We serve the living and true God who sees our need. And God can use us to meet other people's needs. It's a wonderful thing. Let's pray. Lord,